The ballroom smelled like money and secrets. Crystal chandeliers threw fractured light across 500 people who had spent their lives learning how to smile at enemies. The Manhattan skyline pressed against the floor-to-ceiling windows like something desperate and beautiful, all glass and cold fire, 30 floors above a city that never stopped moving. Park Kang-dai stood near the bar. He was not drinking. He was watching. That was what people misunderstood about him. They saw a man in a black tuxedo, still as marble, face carved into something unreadable, and they assumed arrogance, distance, the cold performance of power. But Kang-dai was never still because he was comfortable. He was still because he was calculating. 43 seconds since he had walked into this room. 43 seconds since he had spotted the shift in posture among his men, positioned near the east entrance. 43 seconds since he had felt, at the base of his spine, the particular kind of quiet that meant something was wrong. His eyes moved across the crowd the way a blade moves, clean, precise, leaving no mark on the surface but cutting through everything underneath. And then he saw her. The music had changed. Something slow now. Something almost mournful. The crowd parted, the way crowds always parted when she moved through them, not because they were told to, but because there was something about Didi Amani that made people step back without knowing why. Something that said, "This woman has already survived the thing that would break you." She was wearing red, not a loud red, not a demanding red. A red like embers, so like something that had burned a long time ago and was still warm. Her hair was swept up, a few strands escaping at her neck, and she moved through the space between people the way water moves, around, through, inevitable. Kang-dae's jaw tightened, because she wasn't moving toward him. She was moving toward the center of the room, and she was already in someone's arms. Park Suk-chin. The name landed in Kang-dae's chest like cold metal. His stepbrother, his elder by 7 years and a lifetime of grievances. The man who ran a rival network across 3 eastern cities, who had his fingers in ports and politicians and prisons, who smiled with all his teeth and meant none of it. The man Kang-dai had not spoken to in 2 years. The man Kang-dai would, under different circumstances, have already had removed from this room. Shu Suk-chin's hand rested at the small of Didi's back. Not politely, not like someone who had just met her, like someone who had touched her there before and knew exactly how much pressure to use. And Didi. She was smiling. Not the smile she wore at events like this. Not the practiced, elegant, I am someone's wife smile that Kang-dae had watched her deploy for 6 years at galas and boardroom dinners and charity auctions. This smile was different. This smile was soft, unguarded, the kind of smile that lived in private spaces and wasn't supposed to exist in a room full of people. Kang-dae's hand tightened around the glass in his palm. He heard it before he felt it. A thin, sharp crack. He looked down. A hairline fracture ran up the side of the crystal, and a single thread of red wine traced his fingers like an accusation. He set the glass down without looking away from her. Suk-chin leaned in and said something near her ear. His lips were close enough to graze her hair. Didi laughed. Low. Warm. Real. The kind of laugh she had never once given Kang-dae. He was already moving before the decision formed fully in his mind. 1 step. 2. And then Suk-chin looked up, across the entire ballroom, directly at him, and smiled. Not a surprised smile. Not the smile of a man caught doing something he shouldn't. The smile of a man who had been waiting. Suk-chin raised his chin slightly, like a greeting, like a welcome, like the closing of a trap, and said, loudly enough that the people nearest them went silent. "You're late, little brother?" A pause. She's already chosen. Everything stopped. Not the music. The music kept playing, indifferent and slow. But inside Kang-dae, something ancient and tectonic shifted. He had signed the divorce papers 48 hours ago. He had signed them at 2 in the morning, sitting alone in his home office, the pen moving steadily across the line, because that was what you did when something was over. You ended it cleanly. You didn't bleed in the hallway. You didn't beg. You signed the line, and you moved forward, because that was the only direction a man like him was permitted to move. And Dee Dee had said nothing when he'd told her. She had stood in the doorway of the bedroom, her robe tied neatly at the waist, her face composed as a painting, and she had looked at him for a long moment, and then said, very quietly, "All right. Not. Please don't. Not. I love you. Just, all right." Like it was a schedule change, not like he had told her the car would be 10 minutes late. He had not been able to sleep after that. He had told himself it was because of the deal collapsing in Busan, because of the surveillance operation he suspected was being run against him from inside his own organization. Because of the 100 practical reasons a man in his position had to be awake at 3 in the morning, cataloging threats. He had not let himself think it was because of her. And now she was here, in another man's arms, laughing with her whole face. And that man was his brother. The word brother felt like something rotten in his mouth. Half-brother. Step-brother. The son of his father's second wife was a woman who had arrived when Kangdae was 11 and Sukchin was 18, and already sharp-edged and calculating in ways that 11-year-olds couldn't fully name, but could absolutely feel. Kangdae crossed the room. People moved. They always moved. He stopped 6 feet from them, and he looked at Dee Dee, and he waited. She turned to face him, and the smile, that soft, unguarded, terrible smile, faded. Not into guilt, into composure, into that face he knew, the one that gave him nothing. "Kangdae," she said. Her voice was even, controlled. "Dee Dee." He kept his voice the same. It cost him more than she would ever know. "I wasn't aware you'd be here tonight." "I wasn't aware I needed your permission," she said. Sukchin's smile widened. He removed his hand from her back slowly, like he was doing Kangdae a favor. "So she came as my guest," he said. "I hope that's not a problem." Kangdae looked at his stepbrother for exactly 3 seconds. "Leave us," he said. Sukchin tilted his head. Now, I won't say it twice." Something in the room recalibrated. The nearest cluster of guests drifted away with sudden urgent interest in the bar, in the view, in anything else. Sukchin's own men, positioned at intervals around the room, visible if you knew where to look, shifted almost imperceptibly. Sukchin looked between Kangdae and Dee Dee. His expression was amused, unhurried, the expression of a man who felt he was watching something play out exactly as he had designed. "I'll get us drinks," he said to Dee Dee, touching her arm briefly. "Don't let him ruin your evening." He walked away, and Kangdae was alone with his almost ex-wife. Dee Dee turned back toward the window. The city burned below them. "You wanted a divorce," she said. "I moved on. In 48 hours. Time is relative." She glanced at him sideways. "You of all people should understand efficiency. You knew he would be here. I've been coming to this event for 6 years." She adjusted the delicate bracelet at her wrist. "You never came. Why are you here tonight?" It was a good question, and he did not have an answer he was willing to give her. He was here because one of his intelligence contacts had told him there would be a conversation happening in this building tonight. Between parties, he could not allow to form an alliance, and he needed to intercept it. He was here because of business. He was not here because 3 hours ago he had stood in their apartment for the last time, running his hand along the edge of the kitchen counter, where she always left her coffee cup, and felt something tear loose in his chest that had no business being there. "Why him?" Kangdae said. It was not a question. It was something more uncomfortable than a question. Dee Dee finally turned to look at him fully. Her eyes were dark and steady, and as always, impossible to read. "Why not him?" she said. He had no answer for that either. 3 weeks ago, Didi Amani had sat in a gallery in Chelsea surrounded by light. She worked there, curator at Voss Contemporary, a space that specialized in African and diasporic modern art, the kind of place that smelled like pine floors and slow attention and money that had learned to be quiet about itself. She had been unwrapping a new piece, a massive textile work by a Senegalese artist she had been pursuing for 2 years, when her phone had buzzed. Unknown number. She almost didn't answer. Didi. The voice. She had gone very still. She had known that voice for 15 years. She had heard it in her sleep for the first 3 years after he disappeared. She had built entire emotional architecture around the fact that she would never hear it again. "Kofi," she said. Her voice was flat. Not because she felt nothing, because she felt too much all at once, and her body had simply defaulted to neutral the way it always did when things became too large to contain. "I'm alive," he said. "I can hear that. I need to see you. No. Didi, you died," she said. "I mourned you. I rebuilt. Whatever you need from me, the answer is no." She had hung up. Then she had sat very still for 11 minutes, her hands in her lap, the half-unwrapped textile breathing gently around her. And she had done what she had learned to do. She had filed the feeling, labeled it, set it aside. He called again the next morning, and the morning after that. On the 4th day, she answered. "What do you want?" she said. "To warn you," Kofi said, "and to ask for your help. Those are 2 very different things." "They're the same thing," he said. "Trust me." "I did," she said. "Once." A silence on the line, something that, if she were being honest, sounded like grief. "I know," he said. "I know what I cost you. I'm asking anyway." She had listened. What he told her had taken 40 minutes. She had asked no questions while he spoke. Only when he finished did she say, quietly, quite carefully, "One thing. How long have you known about Sukchin?" 2 years, he said. "I've been building the evidence for 2 years. And Kongdai? Kongdai doesn't know yet. But he will. And when he does, he will move first. And it will be violent. And everyone close to either of them will be caught in it." She had looked out the window of her apartment. Across the river, New Jersey glittered. "What do you need from me?" she said. This was the thing about Didi Amani that almost no one understood. She was not a woman who acted from emotion. She acted from structure. She had grown up in Lagos, in a family that had money, and then did not have money, and then had it again. And she had watched her mother navigate that instability with a particular kind of grace. Not the grace of someone who was comfortable, but the grace of someone who had learned that everything could be taken, and the only protection was to never let anything be entirely yours. She had danced, ballet first, then modern, then the experimental work that had begun to get her noticed in her early 20s, spare, precise performances that critics called emotionally controlled and almost architectural, which was the art world's way of saying beautiful, but don't let it close. She had fallen in love once. Kofi Atta, a Ghanaian architect working in Lagos, warm and laughing, the kind of man who made you feel safe enough to unpack things you'd spent years carrying. She had been 24, he had been 27. They had been together for 3 years when Sukchin entered their lives. Not directly, not visibly. Sukchin worked through intermediaries the way water works through rock, patiently, invisibly, until one day you looked up and the structure was gone. He had wanted the building Kofi's firm was contracted to design, a development in the port district of Lagos, lucrative, strategically placed, the kind of contract that would have set Kofi's firm up for a decade. When Kofi refused to release the contract, the pressure began. Funding pulled. Partners threatened. And then the accident that wasn't an accident, a scaffolding collapse that should have killed Kofi and didn't, but left him badly hurt, and left his lead engineer dead, and left the project collapsed in every sense. Kofi had disappeared 6 months later. Didi had been told he was dead. She had believed it for 12 years. She had come to New York, rebuilt, married a man she didn't love because he could give her safety and a platform, and she had put Kofi Atta in a locked room inside herself and carried that room everywhere like weight. She had not let it show. That was the discipline of grief, learning to make it invisible. But invisible is not gone. And now Kofi was alive, and Suk Chin was here. And the plan had begun. The morning after the ballroom, 6 days after the divorce papers were signed, but before any court had officially processed them, because these things moved slowly, even when hearts moved fast. Kang Dai sat in the back room of a restaurant in Koreatown that he owned under 7 different corporate layers and tried to understand what his eyes had seen. Ji-woo, his head of intelligence, sat across from him. Ji-woo was 31 and looked 23 and thought like a machine that had been trained on every mistake humans made and had committed to never repeating them. He had worked for Kang Dae for 8 years, and Kang Dae trusted him the way he trusted steel, completely, without warmth. "Tell me about Suk Chin's activity over the past 3 months, Kang Dae said. Ji-woo opened a folder. Expanded operations in Newark and Baltimore. New port contacts. We think he's rerouting a significant volume of product through the Atlantic terminals, cutting out the intermediaries he was using before. He's been meeting with a lawyer named Park Hyun-soo, who is connected to 3 of the city council members you have relationships with. He's moving on my political infrastructure. It looks that way." Kang Dae was quiet. The dinner last week, or the one in Tribeca. He had attended a fundraising event. One of the city council members had been there. A man named Delgado, who had been in Kang Dae's pocket for 4 years. Delgado had been unusually distant, unusual short with his words. Delgado is already turning. Possibly. Not possibly. Kang Dae leaned back in his chair. Suk Chin has been planning this for longer than 3 months. Ji-woo nodded slowly. There's something else. He slid a photograph across the table. Grainy. Taken from a distance, through what looked like a cafe window. 2 people at a corner table. Didi, and a man Kang Dae did not recognize. Dark-skinned, well-built, somewhere in his mid-30s. Leaning across the table toward her, the body language was not that of strangers. "When was this taken?" 6 days ago, Ji-woo said. "The morning of the ballroom event." Kang Dae looked at the photograph for a long time. "Who is he?" "We're working on it. He entered the country on a Ghanaian passport 2 weeks ago. The name on the passport is Emmanuel Asante, but the passport is clean in a way that makes us think it isn't real. A manufactured identity." "Yes." Kang Dae tapped the photograph once, very lightly. She met with him the morning of the event, and that evening she appeared on Suk Chin's arm. Ji-woo said nothing. He was good at knowing which silences to fill and which to leave open. "Find out who he is," Kang Dae said. "Real name, full background. I want it within 48 hours. He picked up the photograph and looked at it again. Didi was leaning forward too, slightly, her hands wrapped around a coffee cup. Her face was serious, not the composed, no event-face seriousness, but the real kind. The kind she wore when something mattered. He had seen that face rarely in 6 years of marriage. He had wanted to see it more. He set the photograph down. "One more thing," he said. "Yes." "The information leaks. The operations data that someone has been feeding outside this organization. The trails that kept vanishing near her." He paused. "Reopen the investigation. I want it looked at again. By you, not by anyone else." Ji-woo looked at him carefully. "You think she was involved?" "I think," Kang Dae said, "that I spent 6 years assuming I understood Didi Amani." He stood. "I didn't." Didi came home that afternoon to find that 3 of her things had been moved. Not dramatically. Not aggressively. Just Her coffee cup, which she always left on the left side of the counter, it was on the right. Her phone charger, which she plugged in beside the kitchen island, had been unplugged and coiled neatly, and the small succulent she kept on the windowsill above the sink had been shifted 2 inches toward the center. These were not accidents. She stood in the kitchen for a moment, reading the room the way she always read rooms, looking at what had changed, what had been touched, what the changes were designed to communicate. He was telling her that people had been in the apartment. He was telling her that he knew she'd been somewhere that morning before the ballroom. He was telling her, in the language of small moved objects, that whatever she thought she was doing, he was watching. She walked to the windowsill and moved the succulent back to its place. Then she called Kofi. "He's pulling the intelligence files again," she said, without greeting. A brief pause. "Are you sure?" "I know how he thinks." She looked out at the street below. "He saw the photograph. Someone took a photograph of us." "I was careful. Not careful enough." She said it without anger. Just fact. "You need to move. Change the meeting points. Assume he has someone on you." "How much does he know?" "Not enough," she said. "But he will figure it out. He's very good at it." "Didi." Kofi's voice changed. Quieter. "If this gets dangerous, it's already dangerous," she said. "It was always going to be dangerous. That's why you came back." Another pause. "That's not the only reason," he said. She looked at her own reflection in the window. Cool, composed, the face she had built over years of needing it. "Focus," she said, and ended the call, and she stood there for a moment longer. Then she went to the bedroom, changed out of her clothes from the night before, and sat at the edge of the bed. The apartment was quiet. Kongdae's closet was still half full. His books were still on the nightstand. His running shoes were still by the door. 6 years of a man, still present everywhere, even as the man himself was dissolving away from her. She thought about his face when he had crossed the ballroom toward her. She had expected anger. Kangdae angry was cold, a sharpening of him, all the edges of him becoming more defined, more dangerous. She had not expected what she actually saw in his eyes in the split second before he composed himself. Something she hadn't seen in years. Something she didn't know how to file and label and set aside. She pressed her palms flat against her knees and breathed. This was the problem with plans. They were built on assumptions about who people were. And people, even powerful, cold, dangerous people, had a stubborn habit of being more complicated than your assumptions about them. She could not afford complicated right now. She had a job to do. She stood, smoothed her clothes, and went back to work. 2 days later, Suk-chin called her. She had been expecting it. "You made an impression," he said. His voice was warm. Suk-chin's voice was always warm. It was one of the things that made him dangerous. He had learned long ago that coldness was legible, and warmth was not. "People are still talking." "Let them talk," she said. Kongdae looked like he wanted to dismantle the entire room. "Kongdae always looks like that." Suk-chin laughed, but low and satisfied. "You know, when you first came to me with this arrangement, I wasn't sure. I thought," he paused, "I thought you might be running some angle I couldn't see." "I am," she said. A brief silence. "I appreciate the honesty," he said. "Most people think they're being subtle. I don't bother with subtle when direct is faster." "And what's your angle, Didi?" She considered how much to give him. The balance of this arrangement required her to seem like an ally, and allies gave information. Enough information, the right information. "I want out of the marriage cleanly," she said. "I want assets protected. I want to be somewhere Kongdae can't reach after this is over. And in exchange, I know things about his operations that you don't. Such as the network in Busan, the identity of his contact in the city council, the location of the accounts his lawyers think don't exist." She kept her voice even. "Things that would give you a significant advantage." Suk-chin was quiet for a moment. She could hear him thinking. the quality of his silence, the particular texture of a man recalibrating. "Those are valuable things," he said. "Yes. Why not just give them to law enforcement?" "Because I'm not interested in justice," she said. "I'm interested in survival." He laughed again, genuinely this time, the laugh of a man who recognized something familiar. "All right," he said. "We'll talk more. Thursday." "Thursday," she agreed. She ended the call, and then she sent one text to a number that was not saved in her phone. "He's asking the right questions. Stay close." Somewhere across the city, in a hotel room in Midtown, Kofi Atta read the text. Ein set his phone down and looked out at the same sky. He had spent 12 years building something, a life, a cover, a network of evidence and contacts, and careful, patient work. He had spent 12 years telling himself it was about justice, about dismantling Suk Chin's operation before it could spread further, about protecting the people it had already damaged. He had not let himself think about Dee Dee. Not really. And then he had walked into a Chelsea gallery on a Tuesday afternoon 2 months ago, and she had been standing with her back to him, talking to a client, her voice low and precise, and achingly familiar. He had stood in the doorway for a full minute before she turned. The expression on her face when she saw him had lasted only a fraction of a second before she locked it away. But he had seen it. He had memorized it. He looked at the text on his phone. Stay close. He would. Kang Dai didn't sleep that night either. He sat in his office, the divorce papers in a folder on the desk in front of him, unsigned by the courts. His pen was uncapped. He had been going to make a call, something routine, something operational, and had instead found himself sitting in the dark, looking at nothing. The first time he had seen Dee Dee was at a gallery opening, 7 years ago. He had gone because the gallery owner owed him money, and Kang Dae collected debts with particular attention to timing. Show up when people are comfortable, when they feel safe, and watch them calculate how badly they want to stay comfortable. He had not been thinking about the woman in the green dress standing in front of a large, abstract canvas. And then she had turned, and said something to the person beside her, and laughed. Not the soft, private laugh he would see at the ballroom years later, but a bigger one, surprised and delighted, and something in his chest had done a thing it had never done before. He had told himself it was irrelevant. He had told himself several things over the following months. The marriage had been practical. He needed legitimacy in American social and business circles that a Korean Mafia boss could not access alone. She needed protection from a situation she had not explained, and he had not pressed her on. They were intelligent adults, making an intelligent arrangement. He had not factored in what 6 years of proximity would do. He had not factored in the small things, the way she moved through his space without apology, rearranging things to suit herself, while bringing order where he had tolerated chaos. The way she spoke to people, always precise, always seeing the thing beneath the surface. The way she sat in silence, which was not the silence of emptiness, but of deep, ongoing thought. He had not let himself examine those things too closely, because the one thing he knew about Dee Dee Amani was that she did not love him. She had never pretended to. She had never lied to him about it. She had been, in her way, more honest with him than anyone in his life, because she had always been clear about the transaction, even as he had, privately, stupidly, begun to want more than a transaction. And so, when the marriage had slowly corroded, the distance, the silences, the arguments that went in circles, on the feeling of pressing against a wall that would not give, he had done what he always did with things that couldn't be fixed. He had decided to end it cleanly. And then she was in Suk Chin's arms, laughing, and Suk Chin said she's already chosen. Kang Dae pushed back from the desk. He walked to the window. The city moved below him, indifferent and endless. He thought about the photograph Ji-woo had shown him, the unknown man, the way Dee Dee leaned forward at that cafe table, the series of small data points that his mind was assembling without his permission, into something that was not a picture he was ready to look at. She met with someone before the ballroom. That evening she appeared with Sukchin. She knew he would be watching. She always knew when he was watching, which meant the thought arrived, unquiet and cold and unwelcome. What if the ballroom was not a coincidence? What if none of it was? He stood at the window for a long time. Outside, the city pulsed on without caring about any of it. Not about a cold man staring into the dark. Not about a woman who kept everything locked behind her eyes. Not about the thing between them that had no clean name and no clean ending. His phone buzzed. Ji-woo, he answered. I have the name, Ji-woo said. The man in the photograph. Kang-dae waited. His real name is Kofi Atta. Ji-woo's voice was carefully neutral. He's Ghanaian, used to be based in Lagos. He disappeared approximately 12 years ago under circumstances that were never fully explained. A pause. Kang-dae. Ji-woo very rarely used his name. He and Didi Amani, they knew each other. Before she came to New York. The city moved below. Kang-dae said nothing. They were together, Ji-woo said, for 3 years. The silence that followed was absolute. And then Kang-dae said, very quietly, find out who destroyed him. Ji-woo said nothing more. He understood, from 8 years of working for this man, that some silences were instructions. Kang-dae lowered the phone without ending the call and stood at the window for another moment. Below him, a taxi stopped and released a woman in a yellow coat who walked quickly toward a building entrance and disappeared. Gone. Just like that. One moment present and real, the next absorbed by the city. He thought about a photograph. Didi, leaning forward at a table. A man she had loved. A man the world thought was dead. A man who had somehow found his way back to her. Right now, so precisely now, in the same weeks that Suk-chin was making his move on Kang-dae's operations. Coincidences were things that happened to people who weren't paying attention. Kang-dae raised the phone back to his ear. Everything, he said. I want everything on Kofi Atta, who he worked with, who had reason to want him gone, who had reason to want him back. Yes, Ji-woo said. And Ji-woo? Yes. If Suk-chin's name appears anywhere in that history. He stopped. Let the sentence breathe. Come to me directly. Don't document it. Don't send it through the usual channels. A pause that told him Ji-woo understood exactly what that meant. Understood, Ji-woo said. Kang-dae set the phone down on the desk. He looked at the divorce papers. He did not touch them. Thursday came cold and gray, sun in the sky pressing down on the city like something that had made a decision and wasn't going to be argued with. Didi arrived at the restaurant in the West Village 12 minutes early. She always arrived early. Early was information. Early showed you the room before anyone had arranged themselves in it for your benefit. The restaurant was small, expensive, the kind of place that seated 30 people and had no sign outside because its clients didn't need signs. Suk-chin had chosen it. She noted that. A man who chose a room with only one entrance and a clear sightline to the door was a man who had been uncomfortable somewhere, once, and had learned from it. She sat facing the entrance. Suk-chin arrived at exactly the time he'd said. She noted that too. A man who arrived exactly on time was a man who wanted you to know he was in control of himself. Not casual enough to be late, not eager enough to be early. He sat across from her without greeting and picked up the menu. You look tired, he said, without looking up. I'm not. You were up late. She looked at him steadily. Were you watching my building? I had someone in the area. He set the menu down and finally met her eyes. He had his stepbrother's cheekbones. Sharp, elevated. But where Kang-dae's face was closed, Suk-chin's was open in a way that took a long time to realize was a performance. Old habit. I like to know the landscape. Then you know I was at home, she said. Alone. I know you received a phone call at 11:47 that lasted 9 minutes. He smiled. I don't know who from. She held his gaze. Ought gave him nothing. I'm not going to tell you, she said. He studied her. Most people would explain. Most people are nervous, she said. I'm not. Something shifted in his expression. Not suspicion exactly, but recalibration. Like a man adjusting his grip on something. All right, he said. Then let's talk about what you came to tell me. The waiter appeared. They ordered without ceremony. She chose water. He chose wine. And the ritual of it gave her 2 minutes to organize exactly what she was about to say. Not enough to satisfy him. Enough to seem like progress. Busan first, she said, when the waiter left. Go ahead. He has a man there named Lim Sungjae. The city council contact Lim uses to move documentation through legitimate channels. His name is Cho Byung-ho. Cho also processes permits for 3 port facilities, all of which are used for the volume your people have been trying to access for 2 years. Suk-Chin was quiet. You already knew about Lim, she said. I didn't know about Cho. Now you do. He leaned back, looked at her with the particular expression of a man trying to understand something, not because he lacked intelligence, but because he was suspicious of anything that came too easily. That's worth something, he said, but it's not worth everything you said you had. I know, she said. I'm not giving you everything at once. I'm not an idiot, Suk-Chin. He almost smiled. Almost. No, you're not. This is an ongoing arrangement. You get pieces. In exchange, I get the protection you promised, and when this is over, I leave cleanly. Those are the terms. And if I decide I want everything at once, she looked at him. But then the next call I make, she said quietly, is to Kang Dai. And I tell him you approached me. And this arrangement becomes a different kind of problem for you. The silence between them was not comfortable, but it was, she noted, a silence in which he didn't move, didn't reach for his phone, didn't signal anyone. You're more dangerous than I expected, he said finally. Most people underestimate me, she said. You're welcome to keep doing that, if it helps you feel comfortable. He picked up his wine, drank slowly, set it down. Next week, he said. I want the council contact in New York, the one he's been using for the development permits in Queens. She nodded. I'll have it. They ate. The conversation turned to other things, surface things, the performance of casual alliance. She watched him talk, and she thought about what Kofi had told her about this man, the scaffolding in Lagos, the engineer who had died, the 12 years of careful, deliberate damage that Suk-Chin had done and would never be connected to because he worked through layers and distance and the plausible innocence of men who were never physically present at their own crimes. She kept her face composed. She was very good at that. What Suk-Chin didn't know, what neither Suk-Chin nor Kang Dai knew, yet was that Didi had made a phone call the night before that had nothing to do with either of them. She had called a woman named Priya Anand, who worked at the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network in Washington, D.C., and who had been, for the past 14 months, quietly building a case file that required one specific category of evidence it had not yet been able to obtain. Didi had spent 3 hours on the phone with her. At the end of the call, Priya had said, "This is enough to open the formal investigation, but Didi, once this starts, it moves fast. Are you ready for that?" I've been ready for 12 years, Didi said. What she did not say was, I'm not sure I'm ready for what it does to Kang Dai. She had not let herself examine that thought too closely. She'd filed it, labeled it, tried to set it aside. It kept coming back. 2 days after the Thursday meeting, Kang Dai walked into an apartment in Midtown. Not a grand entrance, not a confrontation with an entourage. Just Kang Dai and one of his men, who waited in the hallway, and a door that opened because the man inside it had not yet learned that a clean passport and a changed name were not the same thing as invisibility. Kofi Atta looked at the man in his doorway and went very still. He was bigger than Kang Dai had expected, broader through the shoulders, the kind of physical presence that suggested someone who had spent time in places where staying alive required more than strategy. His face was composed, but not quite fast enough. There was a half-second of something before the composure arrived, and Kangdae cataloged it. Not fear. Recognition. "Park Kangdae," Kofi said. His voice was even. "Careful." "You know who I am," Kangdae said. "I know a lot of things." Kangdae looked around the room. Neat. A laptop on the table, closed. A folder beside it, now face down. Which meant Kofi had turned it over quickly. Quickly enough that he'd had a second's warning. A sound in the hallway. The particular quality of a silence that meant someone was on the other side of it. "Sit down," Kangdae said. "This is my room." "It is," Kangdae agreed. "Sit down." Kofi sat. Kangdae remained standing. He looked at the man across from him and thought, 12 years. 12 years in the dark, building something, staying hidden. That was not the behavior of a man running from danger. That was the behavior of a man running toward something. "How long have you been working with her?" Kangdae said. Kofi said nothing. "Not long enough to have caused the ballroom," Kangdae said. "The ballroom was staged too carefully. She would have needed weeks, maybe months to set that up. But long enough that she's comfortable trusting you with operational details." He paused. 2 months? 3? Still nothing. "I'm not asking to punish you," Kangdae said. "I'm asking because I need to understand what I'm inside of." Kofi looked at him. Something moved behind his eyes. Assessment, calculation, and underneath that, something older. Something that had been sitting with itself for a long time. "You're inside something that started before you existed," Kofi said. Suk-Chin. It wasn't a question. Kofi registered that. "She told me she married you for protection," Kofi said carefully. "That was what she needed." "She married me to get close to Suk-Chin," Kangdae said. A pause. "You figured that out?" "I'm figuring it out now." He kept his voice neutral. "What I haven't figured out is why." "What did he do?" Kofi looked at him for a long time, weighing something. "He had me killed," he said. The simplicity of it landed hard. "He had you killed," Kangdae repeated. "He arranged it. I survived. But the man who didn't..." Kofi stopped. His jaw tightened for just a moment. "A man named Samuel. My lead engineer. He was 29 years old. He had a daughter." He looked at the closed laptop. Suk-Chin was never touched, never investigated. He was 3 layers away from everything. "And Dee thought I was dead." Kofi's voice flattened. "I let her think that. I had to. If she'd known I was alive, she would have..." He stopped again. "She would have done exactly what she's doing now. But alone, without resources, without protection. So you waited. I built something first." He looked at Kangdae steadily. "Evidence. Our real evidence, the kind that can't be disappeared. Then I came back." Kangdae pulled out the chair across from Kofi and sat down. He put his elbows on the table and looked at this man who had loved the same woman he had. Differently, earlier, with a different kind of claim. And he thought about what 12 years of patient, invisible work looked like from the inside. The discipline of it. The particular loneliness of building something no one could know about. He recognized something in it. He didn't let that show. "What is she planning?" Kangdae said. "I can't tell you that." "You understand that Suk-Chin already suspects her?" Something moved across Kofi's face. "What do you mean?" "He had someone watching her building. He knows about the phone call. He doesn't know who from yet. But Suk-Chin is patient and thorough, and he is already asking questions about her." Kangdae paused. "When he finds the answers, she is in danger. Real danger. Not business danger. The kind that ends conversations permanently." Kofi stood up. Not aggressively. Just up. Like a man who couldn't sit still with what he'd just heard. He turned toward the window. His hands were flat against the sill. His back was to Kangdae. "She knows the risks," he said. "Does she know this specific risk? Does she know he's already watching her this closely?" Silence. Tell me the plan, Kang Dai said. All of it. Because right now, you have two separate operations running, hers and yours. And Suk-Chin is one good intelligence report away from connecting them. When that happens, the plan collapses. And he stopped himself. And she gets hurt, he finished. Kofi turned around. He looked at Kang Dae with the expression of a man solving an equation he hadn't expected to need to solve. You love her, Kofi said. It was not an accusation, just an observation. Said the way a man says a thing he has just understood and is still deciding what to do with. Kang Dae said nothing. She doesn't know that, Kofi said. No. Why? Because, Kang Dae said carefully. She didn't want to be loved by me. She made that clear. He held Kofi's gaze. So I didn't say it. The room was very quiet. Outside, the city moved, oblivious. She's meeting with a federal contact, Kofi said finally. FinCEN. She's been building the information package for 14 months before she ever contacted me. She was already doing this alone. He paused. Day I came back and she'd been carrying it alone for over a year. Something shifted in Kang Dae's chest. He kept his face still. The information she's feeding Suk-Chin, he said. It's controlled. Yes. True enough to seem real. Useless enough that it doesn't actually help him. And the real information goes to Priya. She's the FinCEN contact. Yes. Kang Dae sat with this for a moment. The architecture of it. A woman running a federal intelligence operation, while appearing to betray her husband, while appearing to collaborate with his enemy. All of it, simultaneously, with no support system, except a man the world thought was dead, and an arrangement she had never told him about. He thought about the 6 years, all the evenings she came home from the gallery with something behind her eyes that he had read as distance, that he had read as not wanting to be there with him. What if it wasn't that? What if she had been, every single evening, carrying this, and the distance was not absence, but the weight of something too large and too dangerous to put down? He stood. I want in, he said. Kofi looked at him. This isn't your operation. Suk-Chin is my operation. He's been eating into my infrastructure for months. He's turned at least one of my political contacts. He's rerouting through my port relationships, and when this is done, he paused. When FinCEN moves on him, if my name is anywhere adjacent to his, I absorb consequences I didn't earn. That's a practical argument. It's the only argument I'll make. Kofi looked at him for a long moment. She won't like it. Probably not. She'll think you're trying to control the outcome. She'll be right, Kang Dae said. I am. That's different from trying to control her. A long silence. I'll tell her you came, Kofi said finally. What she decides is hers, Kang Dae agreed. I'm not asking to lead this. I'm asking to not be in the dark while it happens. Kofi nodded once. Slowly. Kang Dae moved toward the door. One more thing, Kofi said. He stopped. The leaks from your organization, Kofi said. The information that was getting out. The trails that kept vanishing. Kang Dae turned. It wasn't her, Kofi said. I want you to know that. She would never. He stopped, steadied himself. She was protecting you. The information that leaked, she was the one flagging it, warning you, or through channels you didn't recognize because you were looking for an enemy, and she wasn't one. The silence that followed had a different quality than the ones before it. Kang Dae looked at Kofi Atta and thought about 6 years of assuming. 6 years of building a case against a woman in his own mind, file by file, suspicion by suspicion, while she had been, quietly, without asking for credit, without asking for anything, watching his back. Thank you, he said. His voice was even. He left. Didi found out about the meeting in Midtown 4 hours later. Kofi called her, and she sat very still on the edge of her desk in the gallery and listened to him explain, in careful detail, what had happened. And she felt something move through her that was not quite anger, and not quite something else, and had no clean name. You told him, she said. Some parts of it. Kofi. He already knew most of it. Didi. He knew about me. He knew about Suk-Chin's surveillance on your building. He would have... I know what he would have done, she said. That's not the point. Then what is? She pressed her fingertips against the desk. The cool wood. The simple fact of a surface. He's in it now, she said. Whether I want him to be or not. Is that the worst thing? She didn't answer. He's not trying to take it from you, Kofi said gently. I think... Don't, she said. Didi. Don't tell me what you think about him, she said. I know what I saw in his face at that ballroom. I know what it means. And I'm not in a position to let that matter right now. A pause. When it's over, Kofi said. She said nothing. When it's over, Didi, then can it matter? She looked out the gallery window. The street below was gray and moving. A couple walked past holding hands, leaning into each other against the cold, and she watched them until they were gone. Focus, she said quietly. But it was softer than when she'd said it before. That evening, Suk-Chin made a move that none of them had anticipated. He called a meeting, not with Didi, not with his own men, with Delgado. The city council member arrived at a private club in the financial district at 8 p.m. and sat across from Suk-Chin for 45 minutes. Jiwoo's man outside clocked the duration and the body language when Delgado emerged, shoulders drawn in, walking quickly, not looking at his phone. The body language of a man who had just received an instruction he didn't want and couldn't refuse. Jiwoo called Kang Dai at 9. He's not just flipping Delgado, Jiwoo said. He's using Delgado to freeze the Queen's development permits, the ones your lawyer has been processing for the past 3 months. Kang Dai absorbed this. The Queen's project was legitimate. A development deal, clean money, the kind of infrastructure investment that was supposed to be the slow, patient conversion of his organization towards something his children could inherit without embarrassment. If those permits were frozen, he's not just attacking the operation, Kang Dai said. He's attacking the exit. Yes, the exit. The long-game version of himself he had been quietly, carefully building. Away from the violence, away from the exposure, towards something that could survive in daylight. Suk-Chin knew about it, which meant someone had told him. Jiwoo, Kang Dai said. I know, Jiwoo said. I'm already pulling the internal access logs. Who knew about the Queen's project? 6 people on our side, 3 at the law firm. 9 people. Kang Dai was quiet. That's too many. One of them is his. Kang Dai stood. He was in his home office. The divorce papers were still on the desk, where they had been for days. He looked at them without seeing them. Find which one. Tonight. He ended the call. He sat in the silence of the apartment and thought about exits, and about people who tried to block them, and about what it meant that his stepbrother, his father's other son, the man who had spent 20 years resenting the inheritance he believed should have been his, had decided that this was the moment to make his final move, not just against the operation, against the future. Kang Dai was still enough, in that moment, to recognize the particular feeling in his chest. He had felt it before, in rooms where things were about to become irreversible. The feeling of a situation contracting, options narrowing, space closing, the window of non-violence beginning to close. He did not want violence. He was very good at it. That was different from wanting it. His phone buzzed. Not Jiwoo this time. A number he hadn't seen in days. Didi. He looked at her name on the screen for 2 full rings before he answered. He moved faster than I expected, she said, without greeting. He was very still. You heard? Kofi heard. One of his contacts at the club made him. She paused. The permits were my idea, Kang Dai. The Queen's project. I'm the one who suggested it to your lawyer 18 months ago. See, I pushed for it. I know. You knew. I thought you were interested in the neighborhood. He paused. I thought it was the first time you'd shown interest in something of mine." A silence. "It was a clean investment," she said. "Something that couldn't be touched. I wanted—" She stopped, started again. "I was trying to build you a way out." The apartment was very quiet. "Dee," he said. "Don't," she said. Quickly, like someone stepping back from an edge. "We don't have time for whatever that is. Sukchin is accelerating because he's nervous. Something spooked him." Kangdai thought about the Midtown apartment, his visit, the things Kofi had told him. If Sukchin had someone watching Kofi, he may know about Kofi, Kangdai said. The silence that followed was a different kind. "How?" she said. Very quiet. "Well, I went to see him this afternoon. If Sukchin had eyes on that building, he would have seen you." Her voice had gone flat. Not cold, flat. The way things went flat, when fear was being processed, before it could become fear. "He would have put you and Kofi in the same frame and started asking what that means." "Yes." "Which means he's asking what I am right now." "Yes." She was quiet for a moment that lasted too long. "Dee, I have a meeting with him tomorrow," she said. Her voice was steady again. She had processed it, filed it, set it aside. "If I cancel, he knows something changed. If you go, I can manage him." "You could manage him before he suspected you," Kang Dai said. "That's a different conversation than the one you're about to walk into." "I know. Then don't go. If I don't go, the information pipeline stops. Supriya loses the thread. The case is not worth your life." The silence that followed was the longest one yet. She said, "You sound like Kofi. Kofi is a smart man." Something almost like a laugh, a breath, nothing more. Then it was gone. "I'll be careful," she said. "That's not what I said. It's the only answer I have." She paused. "Don't come to the meeting. Don't have anyone near that building. If he sees your people, it's over." "Didi, trust me," she said. And then, softer, barely there, like something that had slipped out before she could stop it. "Please." He had never heard her say please before. He had heard her say 100 things over 6 years. He had built, in spite of himself, a private library of the way her voice moved, its rhythms, its registers, the specific texture of it when she was thinking hard, or when she was concealing something, or when she was, rarely, simply speaking without armor. He had never heard please. "All right," he said. His voice was very low. "All right." She ended the call. He sat in the apartment that still had her fingerprints all over it, the rearranged books, the succulent on the windowsill, the coffee cup always on the wrong side of the counter. And he thought about a woman walking into a room tomorrow where a man was already suspicious. He thought about the word, please. He didn't sleep. The next morning was bright, the kind of February brightness that lied about warmth. The light was sharp and cold, and the city threw long shadows. Sukchin had chosen a different location this time. Not a restaurant, or a private townhouse in the East 60s, one of those narrow brownstones that wore its wealth quietly. No nameplate, a single camera above the door that Didi clocked as she climbed the steps. She had dressed carefully. Nothing that looked careful. Dark coat, simple earrings, her hair down. The impression of someone unhurried, unconcerned. She rang the bell. The door opened immediately. Not a member of staff. Sukchin himself. That was the first wrong thing. He stood in the doorway and looked at her with a smile that had always been warm and was now just slightly, just enough. Something else. "Come in," he said. She came in. The house was beautiful and empty in the way of rooms that are kept for specific purposes. No personal photographs, no mess of living. A table set for 2 in a dining room off the entrance hall. The lighting already adjusted. 2 glasses of water poured. She sat. He sat across from her. He looked at her for a moment without speaking. Just looking. The way a man looks at something he is reassessing. You seem well, he said. I am. Good. He picked up his glass. I had an interesting night. Oh? Someone visited a hotel in Midtown yesterday afternoon. His voice was conversational, easy. The warmth still there, but thinner now, like a light coat in the wrong weather. A Ghanaian man, staying under a false name. I've had someone watching that building for a week. I like to know who is moving through the city when I'm planning things. Didi held his gaze, gave him the same composed attention she always gave. The person who visited him, Suk-chun said, setting his glass down carefully, Gwars was my brother. The room was very still. Now, Suk-chun said, and his voice had gone quiet in a way that was much more dangerous than loud. I've been sitting with that all night, trying to understand what it means, and I keep arriving at the same answer. He looked at her. Help me arrive at a different one. Didi looked at Park Suk-chun across the table and thought, this is the moment. Not the plan. Not Priya's case. Not 12 years of evidence. This moment, right now, in a room with one camera above the door and a man whose warmth had just become something with teeth. This was the moment where everything could collapse, or everything could turn. She set her hands flat on the table, very deliberately, so he could see them. So he could see there was nothing in them. And she said, he came to warn me. Suk-chun looked at her hands, flat on the table, then at her face. To warn you, he repeated. About you, she said. She watched the calculation move behind his eyes. She had about 30 seconds before he decided whether to believe her, and she needed to use them perfectly. He found out about our arrangement, she said. I don't know how. His intelligence operation is better than either of us gives him credit for. She kept her voice even, unhurried. He came to tell me that if I was working with you, I was in danger, that you couldn't be trusted. And what did you say? I told him he was 6 years too late to be giving me advice. A silence. Suk-chun looked at her for a long time. She let him look. She did not fill the silence, or soften it, or reach for anything to make it more comfortable. She just sat, hands visible, gaze steady, and let him weigh her. You told him nothing about our arrangement, he said. I told him nothing. And the man in the hotel. I don't know who he is, she said. If Kang-dae was visiting someone in Midtown, that's his business. Another silence. Then Suk-chun leaned back in his chair and looked at the ceiling for a moment. And she recognized it. The exhale of a man releasing a conclusion he'd been holding tensely. He believed her. Not because she'd been convincing, because she'd given him the thing he most wanted to believe. That Kang-dae was scrambling. That Kang-dae was afraid. That Kang-dae was coming to his own wife for information and finding a door closed. Pride was the most reliable vulnerability in powerful men. She had counted on that. He's losing his footing, Suk-chun said, more to himself than to her. He's losing everything, she said, quietly, like someone who had accepted a grief rather than celebrating a victory. Suk-chun looked at her again. The warmth in his expression returned, steadier now, the suspicion draining out of it. The Queen's permits, he said. I've had them frozen. I heard. That must be difficult for you. You pushed for that project. She looked at him. It was his project, not mine. A pause. Not anymore. He nodded slowly, something in the nod that looked almost like respect. Next week, he said. The council contact in Queens, as agreed. As agreed, she said. She drove home with both hands on the wheel, and her mind running very fast and very quiet, the way it always ran when something had almost gone wrong and hadn't. She had bought them time. Not much, but enough. She called Priya from her car, still 3 blocks from the apartment. How close, she said, instead of hello. 2 weeks, maybe less, Priya said. The Busan documentation you sent last month closed the last gap we had in the financial chain. We have continuity from the port accounts to the shell entities to the domestic transfers. It's clean. He froze the Queen's permits. I heard. That actually helps us. It's interference with a legitimate municipal process. We can add it to the obstruction layer. What about Sukchin's exposure in the Lagos incident? A pause. That's older, harder to prosecute directly. But the financial trail from that project connects forward to his current entities. Same account structure, same intermediaries. The pattern is there. Didi stopped at a light, watched a woman push a stroller across the intersection, unhurried. Samuel Mensah, Didi said. His daughter. She's 12 now. What happens for her? If the civil component moves forward, Priya stopped. I'll make sure his family is included in the restitution framework. I promise you that. Didi said nothing for a moment. 2 weeks, she said. Maybe less. Didi, stay away from him until we move. We're too close. I know. She ended the call. The light changed. She drove. What happened next happened in a single evening. And later, when people tried to reconstruct it, they would find that it had the quality of things that were always going to happen. Not fate exactly, but inevitability. The kind that looks like coincidence until you see all the pieces that had been moving toward that point for months, for years, for longer than anyone had admitted. Jiwoo called Kangdae at 6 p.m. I found the leak, he said. His voice was unusual, tighter than normal. The person feeding information to Sukchin about the Queen's project. Who? Park Hyun-soo, the lawyer Sukchin has been meeting with. He's Sukchin's lawyer, I expected. He's also on your law firm's payroll, Jiwoo said. Has been for 4 years. A consultant arrangement, legitimately structured. He's been positioned inside your legal infrastructure since before the Queen's project began. Kangdae was quiet. He's been there for 4 years, Kangdae said. Yes. Before Sukchin's moves began. Yes. This was not opportunistic, Kangdae said. Sukchin planned this 4 years ago. He planted someone and waited. That's what the evidence suggests. 4 years. 4 years of patience, of watching, of letting a man build things and invest in them and believe in them before pulling the foundation out. There's something else, Jiwoo said. Kangdae waited. Park Hyun-soo, we traced his older relationships, before the law firm, before New York. Jiwoo paused. He was a junior associate at a development company in Lagos, 11 years ago. The city outside Kangdae's window went very still. The same development, Jiwoo said. The port project. The one where the scaffolding collapsed. Everything became very clear. Sukchin had not just attacked Kofi's career in Lagos. He had embedded one of his people there as a witness, as an asset. And that asset had traveled with him, patient and invisible, all the way to New York, all the way into Kangdae's own legal structure. He knew, Kangdae said. Sukchin knew about Kofi's connection to Didi, and he knew she would eventually. He stopped. Something cold moved through him. Sukchin knew about Kofi, had known possibly for years, which meant the night at the ballroom, the casual warmth, the hand on her back, the smile across the room, hadn't been about Kangdae at all. It had been about Didi, about determining what she knew, about pulling her close enough to watch. The arrangement she had initiated with Sukchin. She had gone to him, thinking she was the one setting the trap. But what if Sukchin had been expecting her? Jiwoo, Kangdae said. Get a car to her building, now. Don't call ahead, just go. Is she? Now, he said. Didi was in her apartment when she heard the knock, not the buzzer from the lobby, the door itself, which meant someone had come through the building without being announced. She set down the glass of water she'd been holding and stood very still in the center of the kitchen for exactly 2 seconds. Calculating. The building had a concierge. The concierge had instructions. There were 2 ways someone bypassed that. They were a resident, or they had shown the concierge something that ended the conversation before it began. She walked to the door, looked through the peephole. one of Suk-chin's men. She recognized him from the ballroom, a broad, quiet man who had stood near the east entrance with his hands clasped in front of him. She stepped back from the door. Her phone was on the kitchen counter, 8 feet away. She calculated the sound she would make crossing to it. She calculated whether the man in the hallway was alone. She calculated how long the door would hold, and what was on the other side of the apartment windows, and what 30 floors of air looked like in the dark. Then her phone lit up. She crossed to it. A text from a number she didn't recognize, but the message was 2 words she did. Backstairs. She grabbed her coat. She did not take her purse. She did not take her keys. She moved. The back stairwell was cold and smelled like concrete and cleaning products, and the specific absence of people. Dee took the stairs 2 at a time, not running. Running made noise, but moving with the quiet speed of someone who had spent years in a dancer's body and knew how to be large in one moment and invisible in the next. She hit the 2nd floor landing and the door opened. Kang Dai. No coat, his tie loosened. The look of a man who had moved fast and was still moving. She stopped 2 steps above him. They looked at each other. "The car is at the service entrance," he said, very low. "Come now." She came down the last 2 steps. They moved through the door, through a narrow service corridor that smelled like the building's working life. Laundry, machinery, the distant sound of a freight elevator, and out into the sharp cold of the alley. A black car. Ji-woo at the wheel. They were inside and moving before the door had fully closed. Dee sat in the back seat, Kang Dai beside her, their arms almost touching. She was looking straight ahead, and so was he, and the city moved past the windows, indifferent and alive. "How did you know?" she said. "Ji-woo found the leak, the lawyer. And then," he paused, I understood something." "What?" "He knew you were coming," Kang Dai said. "Suk-chin, not in the last few weeks. Longer. He has a man who was in Lagos during the scaffolding collapse, someone who knew about Kofi, someone who came to New York and embedded inside my legal structure and waited." He turned to look at her profile. "Dee, he's been expecting you." She absorbed this without moving. "The ballroom," she said, "was his invitation. Not yours." A silence. "He wanted me close," she said. Not a question. Working through it. "He wanted to know how much I knew, what I had. And whether you were working with anyone." She closed her eyes for exactly 1 second. "He sent someone to my apartment tonight," she said, "after we had lunch, after I convinced him I'd told Kang Dai nothing." She opened her eyes. He didn't believe me." "No. Which means he's moving now. Tonight." "Yes." She turned to look at him. In the dark of the car, in the shifting light of the city going past, he looked the way he sometimes looked in the apartment late at night, when he didn't know she could see him. Not the closed, composed public face, not the version of himself he maintained like a structure, but something underneath it. Something that had been underneath it for a long time. "Kofi," she said. "Ji-woo has a car on his building," Kang Dai said. "He's being moved now." She turned back to the window. "You should have let me run this," she said. Quiet, not angry. "You were running it," he said. "I'm just here," she said. "Yes." Another silence. The car moved through the city. "Priya needs 48 hours, Dee said. Maybe less. She said 2 weeks, but the Busan documentation, it closed something. She might move faster. What do you need from me for 48 hours? She thought about it. What she needed. What the operation needed. What the 48 hours required. "Keep Suk-chin looking at you," she said. "Make noise. Make him think his move tonight spooked you, that you're retaliating, that whatever is coming from you is the thing he needs to focus on." She paused. "Give Priya space to move." Kang Dai was quiet for a moment. "You want me to be the distraction," he said. "I want you," she said carefully. to be the thing he can't stop looking at. Something moved in his expression, a complicated thing, quickly contained. "All right," he said. The next 36 hours were the longest Didi could remember, since the ones immediately following the news of Kofi's disappearance. She stayed in a hotel in Midtown, under a name that wasn't hers, in a room that smelled like other people's trips, and she worked. Priya called every few hours with updates. The financial documentation was being reviewed. The obstruction layer was being added. A federal judge had been briefed. Kofi found her on the second morning. He arrived with coffee and sat across from her at the small table by the window, and they worked together for 4 hours the way they had worked together 20 years ago, in complete, comfortable, professional silence, passing information back and forth, the old fluency between them rising like something that had been submerged, but never gone. Although at one point he looked up and said, "He came to warn you. Before he knew about any of this, he just came." She didn't look up from her laptop. "I know." "Didi, I know, Kofi." He was quiet for a moment. "What are you going to do?" She kept her eyes on the screen. "Finish this." "And after?" She looked up then. He was watching her with the expression she remembered from a long time ago. Warm, steady, the expression of a man who cared enough to ask hard questions and wait for real answers. "I don't know yet," she said. He nodded, accepted it, looked back down at his work. She looked at him for a moment. This man she had loved, this man she had grieved, this man who had come back from the dead for a principle and a plan, and she understood now, for her. This man who was good and brave and had cost her 12 years of herself, and she felt, clearly and without confusion, that she loved him. The way you love someone who was the first real thing that happened to you. The way you love the version of yourself that existed before the world taught you to be careful. And she felt, underneath that, equally clear, something else, something newer. Something that had built itself without her permission in the middle of 6 years of distance and silence, and a man who moved her coffee cup back to the right side of the counter and didn't say anything about it. A man who had signed divorce papers and then stood in the apartment running his hand along the kitchen counter at 3 a.m. A man who had come to a hotel in Midtown not to threaten or to take, but to say, "I don't want you to get hurt." She looked back at her screen. She would figure out the after. Later. On first the end of this. Kangdai made noise. He did it precisely and strategically, and without a single action that was illegal, which was, in its way, the most sophisticated kind of noise there was. He pulled 3 of his lawyers into an emergency session and began the process of filing formal complaints about the Queen's permit freeze, naming Delgado, naming the procedural irregularities, creating a legal record that would take weeks to sort through and would require Suk-chin's attention, and Suk-chin's lawyer's attention continuously. He called in 2 relationships he had not used in years, men who owed him things that couldn't be repaid in money, and through them applied pressure on 2 of the port contacts Suk-chin had been cultivating in Newark. Not threats, just questions. The kind of questions that made people nervous. The kind that made them call the person they were working for and say, "He's asking about us." He let Suk-chin see him. He appeared at a dinner in the financial district, where he knew Suk-chin's people would be watching. He sat at the bar and had 1 drink and spoke to 3 people and left. He attended a morning meeting at his lawyer's office in a car that took a route through 2 neighborhoods where he knew eyes were on him. He was visible, purposeful, moving, and every move said, "I'm coming for you." He was not coming for him. He was buying Priya her 48 hours. On the second evening, Ji-woo called. "He's meeting with Park Hyun-soo tonight," Ji-woo said. 3 hours. "Our source inside says the topic is asset protection, liquidation strategies." "He's getting ready to run," Kang-dae said. Something spooked him. Kang-dae thought about Priya's case, the documentation, the financial chain she had described to Didi. He didn't know all the details, but he knew enough. When people who had built structures like Sukchin's began to feel the ground shift under those structures, they moved in predictable ways. First, they secured what they could. Then, they planned their exit. Then, they moved. The window was closing. He called Didi. "He's preparing to run," he said. Her voice, when she answered, was the voice of someone who had been awake for a long time, but was still fully present. "How long do we have?" "Days, maybe less." She was quiet for a moment. He heard her moving, heard the sound of typing pause. "I'll call Priya now," she said. "Didi." "Yes." He paused. There were several things he had been carrying for several days, and he had put them all down at the right moments, for the right reasons, because this was not the time. But something about the way she had said yes, just that, just one syllable, but with a quality of attention in it that reached through the phone. "Be careful," he said, a breath on the line. "You keep saying that," she said. "You keep requiring it." Something that might have been a small sound, almost a laugh, not quite. "I'll call Priya," she said, and the line went quiet. Priya moved in 31 hours. The warrants came through at 6 in the morning on a Thursday, exactly 22 days after a ballroom in Manhattan, where a glass had cracked in a man's hand and a woman had laughed in someone else's arms. Didi was sitting in the hotel room when her phone lit up with a single text from Priya. "It's done. Turn on the news." She turned on the television. Park Suk-chin was taken from his townhouse in the East 60s at 6:14 in the morning. The footage, shot from across the street by a news camera that had, not coincidentally, been tipped about the location, showed a man in a dark coat being guided into a federal vehicle, with the particular composure of someone who had always known, somewhere underneath everything, that this morning would eventually come. He looked, even then, like a man who was performing calm. He looked, even then, like a man whose warmth was a choice. Didi watched the footage once. Then she turned the television off. She sat in the quiet of the hotel room for a long time. 12 years. Samuel Mensa's daughter was 12 years old. A man had died. A relationship had been destroyed. And she had spent 6 years in a marriage built from necessity, had spent months feeding information to a federal agency, while managing 2 dangerous men and protecting a third. She had done all of it quietly, without credit, without anyone knowing the full architecture of what she was carrying. It was done. She should have felt something clean, something like relief. What she felt was more complicated than that. She called Kofi. He answered on the first ring. She could hear from his voice that he'd already seen the news. "It's over," she said. "Yes." His voice was full. The voice of a man who had been waiting 12 years to say that word, and now that it was here, found that one syllable wasn't big enough for everything it contained. "Didi, it's over." She pressed her hand flat against the window. The city below was waking up, on morning light cutting between the buildings. "Samuel's daughter," she said. "I spoke to Priya. The civil case will include the family. She's going to be okay." She pressed harder against the glass, felt the cold of it against her palm. "Good," she said. "That's good. Didi." His voice changed, gentler now. "What do you need?" She thought about the question honestly, for the first time in a long time. Not what the plan needed. Not what came next, operationally. What she needed. "I don't know yet," she said. "I think I need to remember how to want things just for myself." He was quiet for a moment. "That sounds right," he said. "Kofi." She paused. "Thank you. For coming back. For all of it." "You would have done it alone," he said. "Maybe," she said. It was better not to. A warmth in his silence, old and full in exactly what it was. Love, the durable kind that had survived everything and become, in surviving, something different from what it started as. Not diminished, transformed. Take care of yourself, he said. You too, she said. She ended the call. She sat, and then she did something she almost never did. She let herself cry, not dramatically, not with any performance of it. Just quietly, in a hotel room in Midtown, with the city waking up outside. She let the 12 years of it move through her. The grief of Kofi's disappearance, the loneliness of the marriage, the weight of carrying the plan, the fear of the last few days. Samuel Mensah, who had died young, all the things she had filed and labeled and set aside until later, all the things she was finally permitting herself to feel. It lasted 7 minutes. Then she washed her face, packed the small bag she'd brought, and left the hotel. She did not plan to go to him. She was going to get in a car and go back to the apartment, and she was going to open the windows and let the cold air in and sit with the silence of a space that was about to stop being theirs and become only hers. That was the plan. The car took the route it took. The city moved past, and when the driver asked for the address, she gave him one that wasn't the apartment. She didn't examine it. She had spent enough years examining her own decisions before she was willing to make them. Kang Dae opened the door before she knocked. He had seen the news. He had been awake since 5, sitting in the home office, the divorce papers still on the desk. He had watched the footage of his stepbrother in the dark coat, guided into the federal vehicle, and he had felt something release in his chest that wasn't satisfaction and wasn't grief, but was somewhere between them. The particular feeling of something finally becoming what it was always going to be. He had been sitting with the divorce papers when his phone showed him her car's location through the security app they'd shared for 6 years and never discussed. She was 2 blocks away. He opened the door. She stood in the hallway. She was wearing the same coat from 2 nights ago. No bag. Her hair down, a little undone from 2 days in a hotel. Her eyes, which were always the last thing to change even when everything else did, had something different in them. Not softness, exactly. Something that was what softness looks like in a person who has carried hard things long enough to know that soft is not the same as weak. He stepped back from the door. She came in. She stood in the apartment. Her apartment. His apartment. The apartment that had 6 years of both of them embedded in its walls. And she looked at the kitchen counter, and the succulent on the windowsill, and the divorce papers on the desk through the open office door. He waited. He was good at waiting. I owe you an explanation, she said. You don't, he said. I know the shape of it now. Not all of it. Tell me what you want to tell me. She turned to face him. I didn't marry you for protection, she said. Not primarily. I married you because you were connected to him. Because being your wife put me inside his world, and I needed to be inside his world. She held his gaze. That was the original reason. And after. Not a question. He said it like a man who knew something and was waiting to hear it confirmed. After, she said, and something moved across her face. Not the composed, locked version of her, but the thing underneath it, the thing that had been living behind all of it for years. After, it became more complicated. How complicated, he said. She looked at him for a long time. I spent 6 years trying not to need you, she said. I was quite good at it. Yes, he said. You were. I didn't want to need you, she said. I had already. She paused. Needing someone had already cost me everything once. I was not going to do that again. He stood very still. So I kept you at a distance, she said. And I told myself it was for the plan, that I couldn't afford the distraction, that it was simpler this way. She paused again. Some of that was even true. Some. She looked at the succulent on the windowsill. The Queen's project wasn't strategic. I pushed for it because I wanted... She stopped, started again. I wanted there to be something of yours that would last. Something that couldn't be taken. I wanted that for you. The room was very quiet. I know, he said, His voice was low. "I know that now." She looked back at him. "The leaks," she said. "I was the one flagging them, not feeding them." Jiwoo told me. "I was watching your back," she said. "All 6 years. Not because the plan required it. Because—" She stopped. "Because," he said. "Because you were mine," she said, very quietly. "Even when I wouldn't let you be." Something moved across his face that he did not try to contain. He crossed the room. He stopped in front of her, close enough that she had to look up slightly to meet his eyes. And he looked at her. Really looked at her. The way he had wanted to look at her for 6 years, without the armor of distance between them. "I was going to let you go," he said. "I signed the papers, because I thought that was what you wanted. I thought the most honest thing I could do was give you the out you'd always needed." "It was honest," she said. "I didn't want to," he said. "I want you to know that. Not as a claim, just as a fact. I didn't want to." "I know," she said. "Do you?" "I think," she said slowly. "I have known for a long time. I just wasn't ready to know it." He raised his hand and touched her face, just his thumb, at her jaw, the lightest thing, and she let him. She leaned into it barely, the smallest possible lean, and he felt it like a current. "I'm not asking you to stay," he said. "I meant that when I said it the night of the ballroom in my head, going over what I should have said." He paused. "I'm giving you the choice you never had. Clean. No obligation. No debt. No plan." She looked at him. "What do you want?" she said. "That," he said, "is the first time you've asked me that." She held his gaze. "I'm asking now." He let the truth of it be simple, for once. Let it be uncomplicated by strategy, or pride, or the particular loneliness of loving someone who wouldn't let you. "You," he said. "Just you, on whatever version of that you're willing to give." She was quiet for a long moment. The city existed outside. The morning went on without them. Somewhere across town, federal agents were processing a case that had taken 12 years to build. Somewhere across town, a man named Kofi Atta was probably sitting at a window, looking out, beginning the long process of learning how to be visible again. Somewhere, a 12-year-old girl was going to wake up one day and understand that the world had not entirely failed to account for her father. And here, in an apartment that smelled like both of them, Didi Amani stood in front of a man she had spent 6 years holding at arm's length, and felt, for the first time in longer than she could name, that she did not need to hold anything away from her, that she could, if she chose, simply be in the room. "I need time," she said. "You have it. I need to figure out what I look like when I'm not carrying something." "I'll wait," he said. Simply. Like it wasn't a sacrifice. Like it was just the obvious true thing. She looked at him for a long moment. Then she took a breath, and she did something she had done fewer times in 6 years than she could count on one hand. She let her face be exactly what it was. No composure. No filing. No labeling. No setting aside. Just her face, and what was in it, visible and undefended. And he saw it. All of it. And he didn't move toward it or try to hold it, or name it or claim it. He just saw her. She thought, This is what I didn't let myself have." She reached up and put her hand over his, the one still at her jaw. She held it there. They stood like that in the morning light, or in the complicated wreckage and possibility of a life that was finally, after everything, becoming honest. The divorce papers were on the desk. Neither of them looked at them. Some love stories begin with a spark. This one began with a transaction and a plan, and two people who were both, in their own ways, too experienced with loss to trust what they were feeling. It took betrayal and grief and a federal investigation and a dead man who wasn't dead, and 12 years of patience and 48 hours of fear to bring them to a single room in the morning, holding still. That is not a romantic story. Or maybe it is the most romantic kind. The kind where love doesn't arrive like weather, sudden and undeniable, but builds itself quietly in the spaces between people who are too careful to admit what's happening until they almost lose it. Didi Amani had spent 6 years learning how not to need anyone. Park Kang-dae had spent 6 years loving someone who wouldn't let him. They had both been, in their own ways, running a plan, and both plans had failed, and in failing, made room for something true. If you've ever loved someone from a careful distance, if you've ever held something back because the last time you didn't, it cost you everything, then you understand exactly what it took for her to lean into his hand. And if you've ever waited, quietly, without asking for anything, for someone to be ready, then you understand what it meant that he did. What would you have done in her place? Would you have let the plan matter more? Or would you have let yourself be seen sooner? Tell us in the comments, because this story is really about all of us, and the walls we build, and what it takes to finally come down from them.